Pratiksha is like, might as well record.
Okay, please start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Today we are discussing the anatomy and analgesia of the hip. Ek minute, sir. I'll just minimize this. Yeah.
No, it's all nicely.
So, yeah. So the hip joint is a multi-axial joint, and
Uh,
as we know, it permits a wide. Yes,
you
sir.
can use a pointer to show the diagram.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So the hip joint is a multi-axial joint. As we can see, it is a synovial type of joint. So it permits a wide range of motion, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, as well as it's a very stable joint of the body, uh, that is why it is responsible for the weight bearing function as well. So we just become familiar with the functions, the anatomy of the hip capsule, as well as the functions of the muscle and the innervation to further understand the application of this in the analgesia of the hip. So first we talk about the type of the joint. As we have already discussed, that it is a ball and socket synovial type multi-axial joint. Its articular surface is, as we know, it is the head of the femur and the lunate surface of the acetabulum. So innervation, as we know that the hip innervation is complex and it is highly variable across the population. So it has innervation from femoral nerve, obturator nerve, superior gluteal nerve, nerve to quadratus femoris, as well as sciatic nerve. So we will discuss in detail about the innervation in the further slides. Now, the blood supply, as we know, it gets from the medial and lateral circumflex femoral arteries, obturator artery, as well as superior and inferior gluteal arteries. So as we said, it's a multi-axial joint, movement possible across the hip by the flexion, extension, adduction, abduction, circumduction, internal and external rotation. So just a brief idea about which are the main muscles which are acting on the hip, as well as this gives an idea as to what muscles we expect around the hip joint. So that will help us in identifying these muscles during sonoanatomy as well. So the main flexor of the hip is the iliopsoas. It is the most powerful flexor. There are other muscles which assist its function, but the main muscle to remember for us would be the iliopsoas, which is the main flexor. The main extensor is the gluteus maximus. It is also getting some help from the hamstring muscles. External rotator is from the small group of muscles: piriformis, obturator, internus, superior gemellus, inferior gemellus, quadratus femoris, as well as the gluteus maximus is also giving some contribution. Internal rotation is through the gluteus minimus medius, and also some contribution by the adductors and the tensor fascia lata. Abduction is by the gluteus medius and the minimus. So gluteus maximus mainly is the extensor, whereas the gluteus medius minimus mainly responsible for the abduction. Adduction, again, there are the adductors of the hip. As we all know, adductor longus, brevis, magnus, some contribution by the gracilis also. So again, we have to remember the main functions: flexor, iliopsoas; extensor is gluteus maximus; abduction, gluteus medius and minimus; external rotators, the group of the rotators: piriformis, internus, obturator internus, superior and inferior gemelli. So we'll discuss a little bit about the hip capsule as well as the ligamentous support that it gets around the hip, because this is important in understanding the sensory innervation and the overall anatomy of the hip. So here, as we can see in the figure on the left hand side, that is showing the capsule of the hip. So the capsule of the hip, as we can see here, that there is a fibrocartilaginous uh, extension around the acetabulum covering, which is known as the acetabular labrum. So this is important not only in the sensory innervation, because it does, as we'll see later, it does contain a lot of free nerve ending sensory receptors as well as mechanoreceptors, but also acetabular labrum is the part which is removed in bipolar hemiarthroplasties, and of course in the total it is removed along with the rest of the acetabular brim of the capsule. So it is covered by the acetabular as well as the acetabular labrum here. And over the head of the femur, you'll find that the capsule extends anteriorly up till the point of the intertrochanter, and posteriorly it is around the neck of the femur. So that is the extent of the hip capsule here. So it is richly innervated. I would just tell in brief that it is richly innervated by mechanoreceptors, Ruffini and Pacini corpuscles, as well as it has prenerve endings as well as a lot of sensory receptors. Now, what would be the differential location of these receptors we'll be seeing in the next slides. So this is just an idea about the hip capsule. Next, again, there are ligaments which support the hip joint. So these ligaments also are having the sensory receptors as well as mechanoreceptors. So again, they have a mechanism to play in the pain which is associated with hip surgeries or acute hip trauma. So here, as we can see from the anterior aspect, there is iliofemoral ligament and pubofemoral ligament. Posteriorly, it is supported by the ischiofemoral ligament. So this is just a representative figure, though it is not in detail about the sensory innervation of the hip joint. So as we can see that in the anterior aspect of the hip joint, there is innervation from the femoral nerve and the obturator nerve that is shown in this figure. So a lot of it is getting from the lumbosacral, all of it is coming from the lumbosacral plexus, the innervation. So here, if we see in detail, actually the anterior part of the hip capsule, hip joint is getting innervation not only from the femoral, uh, but the anteromedial aspect is getting the innervation from obturator as well as contribution from the accessory obturator nerve. So both of three of these are responsible for the anterior capsule innervation. Posterior capsule is mostly by the sciatic nerve and some contribution from the nerve to quadratus femoris as well. They say the superior aspect of the hip capsule, hip joint is given innervation by the superior gluteal nerve. So again, there have been a lot of research, a lot of papers which have been published regarding the detailed study of the innervation of the anterior hip capsule. In particular, this study by Short et al., which was published in November 2018 RAPM journal, not only does he explore the whole innervation of the anterior hip capsule, but they are also looking at it with the perspective of how helpful it would be for analgesia purpose, seen through the ultrasonography, and where we could find where would be an optimal location for blocking these nerves as well. So the study has been designed with that aspect in mind. So a lot of important highlights from this study that I have tried to show here is that the landmarks for the nerve they have. So
mentioning something
Hello.
yes, sir.
Please continue. Please
Okay,
continue.
okay, sir. So from this study, the main highlights that I have tried to show here is they have tried to mark the landmarks for the major nerves which are supplying the anterior hip capsule. So that is fundamental in recognition and blocking of the nerves through the ultrasound. So here they found that in the cadavers that they dissected, they found that 92% of the femoral the articular branches were high, which means that they were giving out branches above the inguinal ligament. So the location that they found out was iliopubic eminence and the anterior inferior iliac spine. So between this two locations, they found 92% of femoral nerves during the dissection. Again, obturator high branches, that is before there is division of the anterior and the posterior divisions of the obturator nerve, that is considered to be a high branch. So obturator high branches was given in 61% cases and 74% was given low, that is after the division. So again, these were found in the inferomedial acetabulum. The accessory obturator nerve, again, 54% were found in the iliopubic eminence, which is the same location as the femoral high branches. So again, they found on the detailed study of the anterior hip capsule innervation that the femoral and obturator nerve had contribution of the 100% times they were contributing to their innervation, whereas accessory obturator nerve was contributing more than half of the times, around 54%. So again, high branches in this case, they found in 54% femoral nerve was a high branch and obturator nerve in 31%. So again, this shows that there is a lot of variability in terms of the nerves. We know that they are the femoral and the obturator nerve, but they may be branching high or low. So based on that and the approach that we take, the quality of analgesia can vary greatly. So that is the reason why there is a lot of exploration on this topic to enhance the quality of the analgesia that can be provided post-operatively as well as to the acute hip trauma patients. So we will see more detail about the anatomy and papers regarding this. So here again, what needs to be highlighted is the high articular branches from the femoral as well as the accessory obturator nerve. They are consistently found in the same location, that is between the anterior inferior iliac spine as well as the iliopubic eminence. So between these two landmarks, both the femoral nerve and accessory obturator nerve have been found to be more or less consistently present, whereas the obturator nerve, it is located close to the inferior-medial acetabulum. So this was the finding that was highlighted in the paper by Short. Again, this is supported by other papers which were published by Simmons and Gerthard, in which they again found particularly that the articular branches from the femoral nerve to the hip joint, they enter the iliacus muscle at the L4 and N5 level. And from there, while they are passing deep to the psoas muscle, again, they come to lie between the anterior inferior iliac spine and the iliopubic eminence. So the importance of this level, especially at which it is entering iliacus, can also be put to use. We'll see further that it has been explored that anterior quadratus lumborum block, which is given at the same level again, deep to the psoas muscle, that can also be utilized for the hip analgesia. So this point which has been found in the cadaveric studies has also been put to use. So again, this was about the femoral nerve. The accessory obturator nerve also, it is deep to the medial aspect of the psoas muscle around similar level, around the L5 level. And again, it will course deep to the psoas and it will enter the anteromedial joint capsule. So here it is important, since we know the course of both the nerves, then we can, as they have kind of shortlisted to this particular point where both these nerves are in a surrounding location, in a nearby location, so that can be utilized in order to block these nerves at this particular location. So here, as we can see through the course and the anatomy itself, that 3-in-1 or the fascia iliaca block that was used traditionally will not be able to branch the articular branches of the accessory obturator nerve and femoral nerve, because this is all happening above the level of the inguinal ligament. This is happening suprainguinally, whereas the fascia iliaca block traditionally was given infrainguinally. So these blocks would not be able to cover the articular branches which are given high off. As a result, the analgesia of the hip would be inconsistent and not as satisfactory in a lot of patients. So a little bit more about the sensory nerve endings. As I had summarized before, that they have found that sensory nerve endings and mechanoreceptors, again, they are found to be in a high concentration in the anterior hip capsule, and from the 10 to 2 o'clock position. Again, they have found that in the acetabular labrum, a lot of the concentration of the mechanoreceptors and sensory fibers have been found. So this gives just an idea that more or less in the aspect of hip analgesia, the anterior capsule, the superolateral capsule, these are the important parts which we have to concentrate on the for the hip analgesia. Because as such, if we look overall, then the innervation of the hip is uh, quite varied. So again, they found that the important part here is that the inferior and posterior parts of the capsule, they appear to lack the free nerve endings, in a way to suggest that probably these nerve and their innervations are not as contributory to the pain sensation that is felt So inferior and posterior aspects, as we had discussed earlier, was contributed by the sciatic nerve. They may not be responsible for a majority of the pain that is experienced post-operatively or after acute hip trauma. So that is just a hypothesis through these studies, though nothing has been proven unanimously or without a doubt. So we just, before going further, let's get an idea about what are the hip surgeries and what parts or what is the incision, muscles and everything involved. So we have a clearer idea going ahead. So hip surgeries, basically, we see that they are associated with osteoarthritis, in sickle cell disease, as well as trauma, which is related to the neck of the femur. So when or avascular necrosis of the head of the femur. So if at all the nerve supply, vascular supply to the head is lost, then in that case, the option would be to go with hemiarthroplasty or the total hip arthroplasty, because then the joint would not be functional in case of avascularity. So the options that we have is bipolar hemiarthroplasty, total hip arthroplasty. If there is neck femur fixation, then CC screw, dynamic hip screw, intertrochanteric femur fixation has been seen, as well as acetabular femur fixation. So these are the main surgeries around the hip. So going ahead, just a brief idea about the hip surgery steps that may be relevant to us in understanding uh, the tissue trauma and what could be responsible for the pain post-operatively. So as we know that generally a posterior approach is taken, lateral position of the patient is given. So incision is made from the tip of the greater trochanter going as a curve to the PSIS and down to the thigh. Here tensor fascia lata is cut, the gluteus maximus is split, and the medius as well as the external obturator is reflected back, because here on deeper dissection the sciatic nerve becomes exposed. So they are covering that and reflecting it back. So generally in cases of bipolar especially, there is posterior capsulotomy and there is removal of the labrum. So these are the important steps to understand for us. Also, I would like to make a small comment that what I've observed in our institute is whenever the surgeons do the periarticular infiltration of the local anesthetic, they target the capsule, the remaining of the capsule, while being careful not to cause any vascular puncture, and they have a tendency to infiltrate within the muscles that are reflected, in this case the medius obturator, externus and the maximus. But certain surgeons, they are avoiding to infiltrate subcutaneously, uh, and the belief that they have is that it can cause skin necrosis. I'm not very sure about the reason for it, but this is the periarticular infiltration which is followed. So around 20 to 30 ml of generally 0.25% bupivacaine they take for periarticular infiltration. So now the rest of the techniques for the hip analgesia. As we know that the traditional techniques which are still most commonly used are neuraxial techniques, which include spinal and epidural, lumbar plexus and sacral plexus block. So more important to understand is that these techniques are also such that they can be used for anesthesia as well as the post-op analgesia. So the techniques that we'll be talking after these are mainly the techniques for hip analgesia, and they cannot be used as a sole technique for maintaining surgical anesthesia. So these were the anesthetic as well as the analgesic techniques. We could say a bit more traditional and older techniques. The newer techniques which have come, I have shed more light in the recent present is fascia iliaca block, a modified fascia iliaca block, which is called as the suprainguinal fascia iliaca block, the PENG block, subpectineal obturator block, anterior quadratus lumborum block, and we have already discussed about the periarticular local anesthetic infiltration. So we'll see in brief about each of these techniques and discuss about how it is done and what are the drawbacks. So we're first coming to the fascia iliaca and the suprainguinal fascia iliaca block. Here you can see on the screen that there are two images. The image on the left-hand side is the traditional infrainguinal fascia iliaca block that we give. So here we can see that in the image there is On the lateral side, there is sartorius muscle, and there is the fascia iliaca, under which there is the iliopsoas muscle, the femoral nerve, and femoral artery. So all of these structures are, and above, of course, fascia lata. So all of these structures are visualized in this window. So traditionally, like we do the fascia iliaca block, where you might first recognize the femoral artery and the femoral nerve while you are on the inguinal crease. The probe is placed transversely on the inguinal crease, and then it is taken laterally till the point where you can see the sartorius muscle as well. And after this, from the lateral side of the uh, probe, there is dissection in the layers of the fascia iliaca, so as to push, or so as to strip off the iliopsoas and push it downwards. And a mediolateral spread of the drug is observed within these layers. So this was the traditional inguinal technique that was used for fascia iliaca block. Now, as we have studied, as we just became familiar with the anatomy as well, that this will not be favorable for the higher branches, or if the branches are given off high in the femoral nerve. Also, some people found that uh, with the newer technique, with a different technique, there is more possibility of proximal uh, spread of the local anesthetic. Might also involve, that is why they hypothesize that might also involve the obturator nerve if it spreads more proximally into the lumbar plexus as well. But that has not been proven equivocally within the studies, so we will not be touching on that. So again, suprainguinal fascia iliaca, or a modified fascia iliaca, became introduced. So as the name suggests, that you're going above the level of the inguinal ligament. So I'll just briefly tell about the anatomy here, and in the next slide I'll be able to tell about the probe orientation better. So here, as we can see, that the sartorius is not in the picture. So we have gone a little bit above this level of the inguinal region. So the probe is placed over the ASIS, and while keeping the orientation of the probe in a way that it is following the umbilicus, tilted in a way that we'll be seeing in the further slide. And we are going more medially till the point that you are able to see this constriction, hourglass or bow tie appearance between the sartorius and the oblique muscle. So here there is an hourglass appearance which is taken as a identification of the suprainguinal fascia block. Underneath, of course, we see the iliacus muscle and the fascia over it, and this is the target that we find instead of between the so here, as you can see, that you're not able to see the femoral artery in the picture, uh, which would appear more downwards and medial. So here we can see the orientation of the probe. So the difference from the traditional fascia iliaca block is that traditional fascia iliaca block is where the probe is placed parallel to the inguinal crease. So here, as we can see, first there is the probe will be on the ASIS, and once the ASIS shadow is seen, the bone shadow is seen, you move more laterally with the same orientation of the probe slightly towards the umbilicus, till the point that you're able to see this constriction of the sartorius and the internal oblique muscle. And then the needle is approached from the caudate direction to the cranial direction. So again, there is because of this orientation, there is hope that there would be more proximal spread, and we would be able to cover the high branches as well. So the technique again is the same, that you feel the pop, you see the splitting of the two layers of the fascia iliaca, and the iliopsoas will go downwards. There have been a lot of papers which have been a lot of trials and experimental study. We also have randomized trials for this efficacy of the ultrasound guided fascia iliaca uh, for the after the hip arthroplasty. There has also been comparison between the conventional infrainguinal and the suprainguinal approach, and they have found that with the suprainguinal approach, the requirement for the opioid as well as superiority in the VAS score and the pain relief as compared to the infrainguinal block. There has also been comparison with the periarticular infiltration. And in this particular study, they found that both methods did not have much difference, and they gave similar results in terms of opioid use as well as analgesia quality. So now coming to the next block, now I'll just give a small idea about the probable contraindications in certain cases, like if patient is having an inguinal hernia. So if there is bowel which is within the hernia, at that time it's not a good idea to perform this block. You should avoid suprainguinal fascia iliaca block in that case. And also if patient has got some femoral artery graft, then it is better to avoid the suprainguinal fascia iliaca block. So coming to the next recent block, the pericapsular nerve block for the hip fracture. So this again was, this paper was published in 2018, and a lot of papers or a lot of letters to the editor have been published regarding this block since. So this is probably the newest block and has attracted a lot of attention. So basically, while describing this block, I'll just basically describe it and show in further slides about the probe orientation and such. So this was basically again performed in the supine position. So again, as we discussed, that this is a analgesic block, which is generally done post-operatively for the hip fractures, hip fracture surgeries, or it was, in this case, it was performed on the patients who had come in the trauma department with acute hip fractures. So the low frequency, to mind that they use a low frequency ultrasound probe, which was placed in the transverse plane over the AIIS, anterior inferior iliac spine, and then it is turned counterclockwise in order to align with the pubic ramus. We'll see in the further photos how it is done, by about 45 degrees. So as you have turned it, you will be able to visualize both part of the AIIS, and because you're turning towards the pubic ramus, you'll also be able to see the iliopubic eminence in this case. So as we had already seen in the anatomical study by the Short et al., that at this particular location, there is presence of femoral nerve high branches as well as the accessory obturator nerve. So utilizing this information, this new block was brought about. So at this particular location, when after visualizing all these structures, we have to go from lateral to medial to place the tip in the musculofacial plane between the psoas tendon anteriorly and the pubis ramus posteriorly. So there will be some drug spread anteriorly as well as under the psoas tendon. So that will be covering probably both the accessory obturator as well as the femoral nerve. So around 20 ml volume was used in this particular case. So again, we'll be seeing anatomy again in this place. As we can see that transversely, they have placed the probe over the AIIS, the anterior inferior iliac spine. So during this view, you will be able to appreciate the sartorius, which is originating from the ESIS, the AIIS bony shadow, as well as the iliopsoas, which is taking origin from here. So iliopsoas, and you'll be able to see the femoral nerve and artery at this particular location as well. So here again, what they have done is that they have rotated the probe now counterclockwise in a way that it gets aligned with the pubic ramus. So once you do this, then the femoral artery becomes a little further. It's not as prominent, and prominently the structures that you see is AIIS will still be in view. There's like a straight curved line that we see about which represents the iliopubic eminence as well as the superior pubic ramus. And in between this depression, you see the psoas tendon. So our target is here for the deposition of the drug, anterior to the psoas tendon and the superior pubic ramus. So just over the iliopubic eminence. So again, further follow-up studies and follow-up letters to editor. There was one more paper in by Tran et al. In RAPM 2018, where he investigated in cadavers whether this so-called pericapsular nerve group is actually pericapsular. So by following the same technique and injecting the dye, they found that indeed it was pericapsular, and most of the dye distribution was around around the hip capsule region as described and as seen in the cadaveric dissections. So again, here we see a bit more clearly. about the psoas tendon, the iliopubic eminence, as well as the AIIS, and our target being here. So we see that here, and we see that in these pictures, as we go a little bit more medially, if the probe is taken more medially, then the femoral artery and femoral nerve become much more closer, and we'll see its importance as well. So they found certain more follow-up letters to the editor. They found while practicing the Peng block that because of its closeness to the femoral artery and the femoral nerve, they found that in certain patients there was quadriceps weakness which was seen post this block performance, which was not expected and which was also not reported in the original paper. So they found that because they were using uh, the curvilinear probe, many times they found that they were not able to follow the needle trajectory closely, and accidentally they could go a little bit more medially and probably injure the femoral nerve, which had probably resulted in the quadriceps weakness. Its location is as such more superficial, and like if the uh, injection is deposited more superficially instead of going deeper between the iliopubic eminence and the psoas tendon, then definitely it can cause quadriceps weakness. So these were the points that they found. In another study, they found that there is also, because of the anatomical relation, there could also be trauma to the pelvic ureter as well. So these are the things that we need to keep in mind. Again, there has not been a randomized control trial that I have come across in finding this, that has not been published yet, I believe. So this still needs more exploration. But considering the anatomy and the cadaveric dissections in mind, it is a newer and an interesting approach to hip analgesia. Now, further, as we discuss that this particular approach will block definitely the accessory obturator nerve and the femoral nerve, but probably the branches, the high branches from the obturator nerve will not be blocked by this. So there has been hypothesis of combining this with certain other blocks to cause to cause more satisfactory or complete analgesia. So again, a subpectineal obturator nerve block has been hypothesized, has been suggested. So as we know that the infrainguinal or the traditional obturator nerve block that we do, in which we are blocking the anterior and the posterior division of the obturator nerve. So that is between the adductor longus and brevis, the anterior division, and adductor brevis and magnus, we are blocking the posterior division. So when we talk about obturator nerve having high branches, it means that it has left, the articular branches have left the obturator nerve before the division. So if you are blocking at the level of this division, then it is not going to be effective in blocking the articular branches. So we have to go for a higher approach, which is the subpectineal obturator nerve block. So here, as you can see in the images that are shown on the screen, the first step is to place the ultrasound probe along the inguinal crease, but you are supposed to be a bit more medial as compared to the approach that we take for fascia iliaca or femoral nerve. So when we once we have visualized here, you'll see this kind of a picture in the first corresponding to the first image in the last slide. So here we see like a Y-shaped kind of a structure with its stem towards the adductor longus side. So here you see when you go more medial from the femoral artery, when you still take the probe a little bit further, you find that there is pectineus muscle, and above you find the adductor longus and the adductor brevis muscle. So here when you are blocking, at that time you're blocking the anterior division of the obturator, but here our target is the subpectineal, so we'll see how we go further. So once you see these structures, now you're supposed to rotate the probe a little bit cranially by 40 to 50 degrees and identify the superior pubic ramus. So the second picture would be something like this. So as you can see that the adductor longus and brevis has gotten a little bit pushed out, and we see the bony shadow of the superior pubic ramus and the obturator externus, which is attached to it. So these two come in picture once we move the probe a little bit cranially. So once this is visualized, then our next step is to deposit the drug deep to the pectineus between the intramuscular facial plane between the pectineus and the obturator externus. So here basically you will be kind of hitting the bone with the superior pubic ramus, and that is where you're supposed to deposit the drug for subpectineal obturator nerve block. So the other block that has also been described and certain studies have taken place is over the anterior quadratus lumborum block. So as we had seen and I had highlighted during the anatomy of the uh, hip joint, the studies, the innovation studies that were found, that the femoral nerve as well as the accessory obturator nerve were seen that they were leaving at the level of L4, L5, and they were deep to the psoas muscle. So keeping this in mind, when we do an anterior quadratus lumborum block, or also known as the QL3 block. So here, as you can see in the image, that we are basically, when you go between the QL and the ESM, then you're performing a posterior quadratus lumborum block. Here we are going between the quadratus lumborum and the psoas major and depositing the drug there. So this will be the anterior quadratus lumborum block. And we've also seen that when we are visualizing the lumbar plexus uh, for the lumbar plexus block, then again it is found basically deep to the or within the substance of the psoas major. So here when you are depositing the drug here, definitely there is going to be uh, effect on the analgesia of the hip as well. So they found a study, they conducted a study with around 36 patients, where 36 patients received the anterior quadratus lumborum block. The other was not receiving. This was a control group. So they found in their data that there was effective analgesia initially, at least within the early postoperative period. They found that the pain score was better with the anterior quadratus lumborum block, but later there was no difference in both the groups. However, this does give an idea that the anterior quadratus lumborum block would also have effect in the hip analgesia postoperatively. So just to summarize the advantages of the newer blocks, newer as in discounting the neuraxial techniques as well as the lumbar and the sacral plexus block, these were brought into picture with an idea of having a motor sparing analgesia, because as we know that patients who have had bipolar surgeries and so, they are mobilized early on. In fact, same day of the, or the same evening of the surgery, they try to mobilize these patients. Same is though not the case with dynamic hip screw and IT fracture femurs, but in certain surgeries there is early mobilization. So motor sparing analgesia will definitely uh, cause an enhanced recovery of the patient and mobilization of the patient. So that is the main aim of exploring these many newer blocks. So of course, they avoid complications with the neuraxial anesthesia. With and of course, the with the newer blocks, if we are using continuous catheters, then that would definitely be helpful in uh, prolonging the analgesia and the postoperative period till the second or the third day as well. So again, these are all, as we said, newer blocks, and they have not been as tried and tested as the older techniques. So they still require more trials and meta-analysis to be considered to become more to become as common as the older techniques. Thank you.
Yes.
Well summarized, Pratiksha.
Yes, ma'am.
Well summarized. You can hear me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
The only thing is hip.
You can close the share share
Sorry.
part.
Okay.
Share. Yes,
Sorry.
Neeta, you can continue.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know regarding uh, if you come to the anatomy with regards to contribution of the genitofemoral, is it important? And the lateral femoral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, have you mentioned that it has to be considered while considering post-op analgesia?
Yes, I did not mention that, but obviously because the incision comes over the lateral part of the thigh, then definitely lateral femoral cutaneous nerve has a contribution to this, and there have been some studies that I came across that they were combining PENG with LFCN and a combination of
The
such
correspondence
blocks to cover the
issue with
skin innervation part.
the issue with PENG, as you mentioned, is there are no RCTs. So considering none of these techniques are actually level 1 or class A recommendation and such. What about erector spiny block? Lumbar erector spiny blocks would also be added as to the newer modalities in managing hip analgesia post-operative.
I've actually, ma'am, not come across this as in terms of papers and such, but definitely I think if you're trying with QL3, then lumbar
There is
erector spiny could have.
There is a Dizda Revic, a good article in 2019, which covered this topic quite well. Probably I'll share the paper with you. And how about, it's there in current analgesia and headache. Actually, it's a very unconventional journal for regional anesthesia topic, but the article is very nice.
Okay.
Can you comment something about the prospect guidelines for hip analgesia?
No, ma'am, I did not read that.
Okay. Anyone else would like to comment on that? If not, I'll summarize in the end. How about continuous spinal anesthesia? See,
Actually,
considering when we talk about hip analgesia, there are different aspects to it. So you have covered it very well. Probably I would have looked at it in terms of pre-operative, intraoperative, and post-operative. So like how the prospect group has suggested is, most often our patients are elderly, frail, with multiple comorbidities, very unlike, say, total knee replacement. Hip surgeries are something which are which need to be taken up on urgent basis as an emergency. So a lot of differences between different types of surgery, between joint replacement as such. So 2-3 things. We'll come to that. What are the different types of fractures as you mentioned? Can you tell me which is more bad, which is more worse?
The neck of femur fractures, which are like transcervical, which basically transect the artery, then that is definitely more dangerous, because again that causes the avascularization.
And extracapsular, right?
Intracapsular and intracapsular is worse, right?
What compromises the blood supply?
Intracapsular, I think, ma'am.
Intracapsular compromises the blood supply more. Considering extracapsular, again, it's a weight-bearing joint. As you have rightly mentioned, there are various factors which add to planning analgesia with regards to skin. As we all know, the incision goes high up to the lower thoracic levels, so that also needs to be factored in. Probably that's why quadratus lumborum has shown to be a promising factor in managing post-operative analgesia. Coming to ligaments, the bone, the blood supply, and pain transmitting mechanisms of the anterior capsule more than the posterior capsule. So that probably explains why the femoral alone gives reasonable amount of pain relief for making the patient sit up, despite not taking care of the posterior aspect of the hip joint. Then coming to, can you just categorize or tell me the differences between the analgesia of the hip joint and the knee joint, just to compare contrast? How is this challenging versus that?
Difference.
You say that the pain encountered is similar in they are encountered. As we mentioned, TKRs are usually elective procedures.
Yes.
There's less time to optimize. If you wait for optimization, it's usually delayed.
Hmm.
There are problems of taking up hip patients later, right? Versus taking them up immediately.
Yes.
And as I mentioned, the prospect group, what they say is we have to be done or choose a plan of analgesia, anesthesia, which also obviously provides analgesia intraoperatively, which is very specific to that condition for intra-op purpose. When you're doing the case,
Hmm.
the first thing that comes to mind in frail, extremely elderly patients with comorbidities is to just be done with the case first, and then you can think about post-op
Plan
analgesia.
analgesia. Right.
Your comments on general anesthesia being a modality?
That is definitely always an option, but then again, as we mentioned that these cases or the patient profile which is presenting for these cases are generally frail and elderly. You have to look at the overall cardiovascular status as well of the patient. But I mean, whenever we can employ regional technique, I think it's a better option to general anesthesia, considering the age group.
Is there evidence? Is there evidence to state that regional is better than general or general is better than regional?
Not sure about the papers.
Anybody else? Any evidence to say that in elderly patients, obviously, if the patient needs to be operated on an emergency basis, usually these patients are on blood thinners. So it's weighing the pros and cons versus, encountering bleeding tendency versus taking them up later and encountering DVT and probably pneumonias or higher 30-day mortalities, which is an evidence of taking up these fractures when they are much later, as in delaying it beyond 48 hours. So actually recent evidence is saying that regional is better, but not, it's marginally better. It's not like in percentage 40-50% better than general anesthesia. General anesthesia with multimodal analgesia is also a possibility, and considering a peripheral nerve block if essential. So there was no mention of multimodal analgesia, right? Because no single technique is complete in a way.
Yes.
Okay, something or the other is spared. With regards to your femoral, sciatic, obturator, as I said, genitofemoral, lateral femoral cutaneous nerve of the thigh. Okay, so
Yes, ma'am.
then when I was talking about differences between hip and knee, one is urgent or emergent procedure, other one is an elective procedure. Coming to, you're able to do the exercise for the knee patients, although they do have pain, but they're not like bedridden like hip patients. So you're able to, in fact, when you do strengthening exercises, it improves the outcome and reduces the post-op analgesic requirement as well, and improves rehabilitation and ambulation in this set of patients as well, right? Okay, then
So, ma'am,
continue.
I wanted to ask a question about that, because the patients who present with TKR generally that is due to the osteoarthritis. So most of them already have chronic pain over a long period of time. So does that affect the pain profile of the patient post-operatively as well?
There is a direct correlation between osteoporosis and chronic pain and delayed rehabilitation or prolonged hospital length of stay in the hospital. So most of these patients are on calcium, are on bisphosphonates. So there is evidence to say before the year 2000, there were a lot of hip fractures. But after 2000 to 2013, considering there was emergence of bone mineral density tests, people started taking in more calcium, bisphosphonates. So they said that the incidence was lower, but not as minimalistic. So this is what they have noted. Coming to hip joint and knee joint difference with regards to analgesia, with regards to the muscle involvement, right? Hip, as you said, there are extensors, flexors, there are abductors, internal rotators, external rotators. The incision is reasonably through the muscle, the tensor fasciae lata, which is again one of the important additional flexors, I believe, and external rotator, internal rotator.
No, that is, I think it's a flexor. I have to confirm.
It adds to the flexion, but it also adds to the internal or the external rotation. So that itself gets cut. Okay, so
Yes.
the number of muscles, they try not to cut the gluteus. They kind of separate, or they push it aside. But incision may involve that, but as posterior, as you mentioned. Okay, so with regards to the muscles around the joint, I'm talking about the differences between knee and. So as I said, it's planned elective. The hip population is more elderly, frail, with a lot of comorbidities, psychological aspects. Okay. So what else with regards to? So coming to pre-op, intra-op, and post-op with regards to hip analgesia, what would you recommend? Pre-op. Does it have a bearing on reducing the post-op pain relief? Providing post-op pain relief? You got my question?
Whether giving pre-op analgesia will improve
Correct.
post-operative analgesia as well.
Correct.
Pre-operatively, in fact, the way that they had described in the paper for the PENG, they had actually used all of these for analgesia pre-operatively in acute hip trauma patients, those who had presented in the casualty. So again, the kind of blocks which cause motor sparing effect, which does not cause any weakness of the muscle, that could be a good strategy for pre-operative pain relief.
See, because pre-op they are not ambulated. As long as they are not ambulated, as long as they are pain-free, that's good enough. Plus, elderly patients, because they are bedridden, they are started on anticoagulants. So, bearing as to what you're going to be giving this patient with regards to, if the patient is a long-acting oral, the newer oral anticoagulant, which we most often need to stop for 4 to 5 days, right? But the patient doesn't have that much time. As I told you, delayed surgery of more than 48 hours, the complications are way higher. So we have to weigh, so probably giving this patient a general anesthesia with multimodal analgesia, giving a superficial block to consider post-op analgesia would probably be more beneficial versus waiting for 48 hours. So that, again, you need to highlight how are you going to choose the question to you with regards to what is the type of hip analgesia or anesthesia that you would be providing. These things need to be taken into consideration, right? So urgent, emergency, comorbidities, frail, elderly, psychological issues, cognitive dysfunction, again, needs to be highlighted in this age group, right? On oral anticoagulants, fine? Then coming to, you have described the blocks in detail, so I'm not going to ask you how you do it because you have gone through it pretty well. But I mentioned about, as I said, erector spinae and lumbar erector spinae and continuous spinal anesthesia rather. So obviously in these patients, because they are on anticoagulants, the catheter is not kept for long duration. Then again, a mention of continuous catheters. Which would you prefer? Which are the places what you have discussed where you would prefer to put in a continuous catheter or a post-op analgesia?
A continuous suprainguinal fascia iliaca catheter. That is because it lodges between the muscles, so that is a good place for the catheter to stay in. And
to fix more the anterior part of the thigh. Okay. What else?
PENG up till no PENG for PENG they have not described any continuous catheter up till this point. Continuous femoral catheters that can be considered.
So that can be even considered in the pre-op, considering it's pretty superficial.
Yes.
And as I'm not sure whether you're aware, pre-operative reduction of pain has a very important role in rehabilitation as well as reducing chronic pain in the post-operative period, as well as a better outcome, better, as I said, ambulation, earlier to exercise, reducing the length of stay. So there have been papers which show a direct correlation of managing the pre-op pain relief. Where else? Catheters, you said femoral, suprainguinal, then fascia iliaca.
If we are going to perform a lumbar plexus technique or sacral plexus. So lumbar plexus continuous catheter can be considered. That will give good analgesia because it will be covering the femoral accessory obturator. So that
Okay.
is a
Now,
good idea.
whatever you have mentioned, okay, whatever you have mentioned with regards to a choice for anesthesia and post-op analgesia, you will have to justify with pros and cons. If I say I'm going to give general anesthesia, in which patients would I give general anesthesia? Probably where it is an emergency procedure, patient is on blood thinners, but weighing pros and cons, it needs to be done, I'll give general. With a multimodal analgesia, and think of a more superficial block, which is probably not an absolute contraindication, right? Or whether I go in for high-risk cardiopulmonary compromised patients. There have been papers that patients with low ejection fraction people have tried very low dose spinal anesthetic continuous catheters. Okay, so pros and cons of each technique, at least 5 points you should be able to express. What is your comment on epidural analgesia in here?
Again, for epidural anesthesia, we have to be sure of the coagulation profile because there is possibility of epidural hematoma if there is derangement of the coagulation profile if patient is on blood thinner. So during performance, that is definitely a disadvantage. With epidural anesthesia, again, motor weakness can be present. So early ambulation of the patients can become a problem, especially in bipolar where they are ambulating quite early. So that can contribute to difficulty. So that is an issue. And other complications with epidural, intraoperatively hypotension, even though with gradual dosing, we try to reduce that complication, but it cannot be entirely ruled out. So that is definitely a disadvantage with the epidural anesthesia. And then other more rare complications with the epidural anesthesia, there has been found some weakness of the bladder bowel.
As well, non-operative limb, there could be paresthesia. So epidural per se, it definitely brings about significant pain relief. Okay, it definitely improves the management of pain. It promotes early mobilization. But on the contrast, with regards to the cons, you would consider urinary retention in some patients where your mixture is involving a mixture of local anesthetic with opioids. There's incidence of itchiness. There is incidence of, as you mentioned, hypotension. So more or less in hip surgery, unless it's a revision THR or epidural is more or less phasing out, unless the patient's threshold is extremely, it's a easier technique to perform versus any of the other peripheral nerve blocks. Okay, so then with regards to how will you justify peripheral blocks, pros and cons? So peripheral blocks, out of whatever you have mentioned, which provides anesthesia plus post-op analgesia? Neuraxial chhod ke, GA chhod ke. Whatever you have mentioned.
If you are using lumbar plexus, sacral plexus block, then that can be used because we have done such cases as well.
Plus post-op analgesia will be there for at least 8 to 12 hours on an average. Okay.
And we can use continuous catheter to in the lumbar plexus to increase the duration of post-operative analgesia as well.
Fair enough. Anything else is for anesthesia? So anesthesia purposes, it's only spinal, GA, lumbar sacral, plexus block, right? Whatever else you've mentioned is more for post-operative analgesia. So even if it comes as a question, please be very cautious when you read. It's hip anesthesia and analgesia for hip surgeries. Okay, and in the analgesia part, as you have mentioned, you can subperitoneal or the QL or ESP or fascia iliaca pain can be mentioned. Have you read about LIA being effective in hip?
LIA being effective in?
See, LIA, local infiltration anesthesia, is practiced both in hip as well as knee. Right? Plus in various laparotomy, you can't put in an epidural. Is there evidence to state that it contributes to significant pain relief and rehabilitation?
Actually, most of the time, even in the case for knee surgeries, when we are using LIA, it is always in addition with other techniques for analgesia, that either there is also an epidural or we also do an IPAC block along with adductor canal block. So just solely with LIA, at least in knee surgeries, there has not been found such encouraging results. But as I had mentioned earlier in my slide as well, that they had compared the local infiltration around the hip with the suprainguinal facial iliaca block, and they found that there were similar results with the analgesia in that particular study, which was also a randomized study. So there they found this result. So I think in this case, probably with hip, there are more encouraging results as compared to knee alone with just local infiltration technique.
So I read a couple of articles with regards to this, and they've said that what they have mentioned is there is no additional analgesic effect of LIA when it's always accompanied with multimodal analgesia. जब multimodal analgesia already है, LIA दिया कि नहीं दिया, it doesn't make additional recovery, or it does not have an impact or bearing on the length of stay. Okay. Now, LIA was compared and contrasted with in THR and TKR both. So what some studies have mentioned is additional effect in THR when there is multimodal may not be additional effect any. Okay, so this also has been mentioned, but it certainly reduces the consumption of opioids in the immediate post-op period. Early post-operative analgesia is reasonably good. Usually what we do is we give anesthesia to just be done with the case. So usually in the early post-operative period, if a post-operative block is not planned, they do have higher pain scores in the immediate post-op period. So LIA, they have mentioned in hip, when they have done certain, they've gone through some 27 randomized control trials. There's an article by Kellett in 2014. It's not very recent. But what they said is, it has limited additional analgesic effect. Okay. Then, okay. Now, can you tell me in the periarticular infiltration, you have said what all is used? Yeah. They can ask you about LIA, what goes into, what combinations go into LIA. So can you just enumerate what usual cocktail is used?
So in our institute, what I noticed was that with the bipolar and the hip surgeries, generally they were just using local anesthetic itself. Most of the time 0.25% bupivacaine. But with the knee surgeries, there is a sort of a recipe for the cocktails that are made, and there is combination of, along with the local anesthetic, they have combination of NSAIDs, opioids, that is morphine or fentanyl, along with even antibiotics for that matter. So they have combination of there are many such recipes which are available as to the combinations that they use. But in knee, I have seen that there is a combination of NSAIDs, opioids, local anesthetics, along with even antibiotics at times.
Okay. So they can be steroid, they can be morphine, they can be clonidine, ketorolac. Okay. And how this acts is they're targeting the mu receptors or probably reducing the local inflammatory response. Right?
Yes.
In the post-operative period, you get a call, maybe 3 hours down the line, that the patient is extremely delirious. What will come into your mind first? You got my question?
Yes. Actually, I went through a little bit superficially where I saw certain papers about post-op delirium in lower extremity surgeries, especially. But I did not read in details. I'm not sure about this. But I know that it is associated in old age patients with
very much with pain management. So the first thing that should come to your mind is that the patient is in severe pain. Okay. So there are certain studies to say that delirium should always be considered as one of the causative factors being pain, improper pain management in this class of patients, and in fact up to 30 to 40% may not be able to tell you actually that pain is the reason for their delirious condition. Okay, so assessing the cognition pre-operative is extremely important, right? In the pre-operative period. One more thing I missed out is pre-operative. You mentioned about femoral, maybe fascia iliaca. Well, what I mean to ask you is on arrival blocks in a hip surgery. Okay, so can you just tell me 2-3 things? You mentioned femoral,
fascia iliaca.
right?
They have also started using PENG for that purpose, acute
right?
neck trauma.
So PENG with the lateral femoral cutaneous, right? At least for 6 to 8 hours, they should be reasonably relieved. Meanwhile, we can set in with the multimodal analgesic medications. Can you enumerate what IV painkillers can be given to this class of patients?
So since this is an elderly age group, again, we have to take into consideration the renal function, especially. So in order to whether or not we can consider giving the NSAIDs or not. So the advanced age as well as the renal status is an important consideration for that. Otherwise, NSAIDs, popularly ketorolac, celecoxib, I have also studied in certain papers about celecoxib 200 mg to be given as an NSAID as a part of multimodal analgesia. So other than that, what we use is injection paracetamol IV. That can
be given every 6 hourly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, max. Weak opioids, that is tramadol. We can also consider. Again, we have to.
There's severe pain. Can you consider giving a strong opioid?
Fentanyl.
Is it safe in this group of patients to give opioid left, right, center? There's nothing called a strong opioid, weak opioid. So, if severe pain hai, is it justified giving a opioid? And what would you consider? Yes, this is the correct amount to give.
In case of acute pain, Sarnak.
Acute pain. You mentioned NSAIDs, you mentioned paracetamol, COX, specific COX-2. So opioids, whatever is the lowest dose that achieves pain control is considered safe. Okay. Whatever lowest dose is given to the patient that brings about immediate pain control can be considered safe. Long-acting preferably avoid, but most of the Western literature talks in terms of reducing morphine requirement. There have been reports of even using intrathecal morphine. So that's enough for the case as well as post-op analgesia. But of course, it has its own side effects. Okay. So can you tell me some risk factors? As I told you, pain is one of the important causes of delirium. Certain other risk factors that contribute to delirium in these patients?
The advanced age as well as previous psychosocial
cognitive
issues.
impairment, right? Especially if these people come from, not from their own homes. In Western literature, they've said they come from institutions. Okay. If they have multiple comorbidities, if they are on morphine prior, okay, and more in males versus females. Okay. So prior cognitive impairment, advanced age, institutional, they have been staying in some certain institutions and then come for surgeries, multiple comorbidities, use of morphine prior to surgery for whatever reason, males more than females. Okay. Okay. Another thing to note is when we talk about opioids, about NSAIDs, we have to remember most literature says there is a study by White et al. Also, which they've done like more than 2 lakh patients studied. most of this age group, 36% of them have renal dysfunction. Okay, so whether NSAIDs can be given to them, and the issue with NSAIDs in these patients is obviously we see the creatinine level. If I say it's a 90-year-old and the creatinine is 1.4, is it normal?
I mean, we have to look at the age because the formula for creatinine clearance is all age related. But I
would can use the creatinine clearance, but with age the muscle mass reduces. So actually they shouldn't be having a higher creatinine. So they have to be subjected to a renal assessment. Okay. Any mention about a cryotherapy in hip, considering just to complete analgesia of the hip joint? Any role of cryo?
I've seen as an alternative therapy pre-operatively or in chronic hip pain that mentioned cryotherapy as well as radio frequency therapy. Also, they had there was a mention about both of these also in chronic hip pain or in pre-operative period.
Okay, so they have mentioned TENS. Have they mentioned TENS, radio frequency? Cryotherapy basically is bringing about the cold reduces tissue metabolism, reduces inflammation in that particular area localized. It's said to reduce leukocyte migration, okay, and it slows this nerve transmission. So basically transmission of pain, okay, in the pathway. So it reduces the extravasation of blood into the surrounding tissue, which again contributes to adding to the pain factor, positives of pain. So again, acupressure, relaxation therapy, physical therapy should also be mentioned. With regards to physiotherapy, just to aid the physiotherapy, can you tell me something about dexmedetomidine in this type of patients? Whether it has been used, there is any evidence to say कि multimodal में dexmed का भी role है?
Dexmedetomidine with this, it actually has a weak analgesic action. Dexmedetomidine, when we use it as a sedative support, because it can give conscious sedation, so that is definitely an advantage. But again, you have to look at the cardiovascular status of these patients, because dexmedetomidine does cause bradycardia and depression of the cardiac activity such. So I would not.
So it, as you said, it does bring about analgesia. It's not an absolute, that's the only thing and you don't have to use anything. But it reduces again opioid requirement. It provides sedation. If you're doing a case in lumbosacral, the surgeon takes on more time and the lower dependent limb is not blocked. Okay, so that itself, the patient gets restless. So it can be used as a way to tide over or reduce the overall analgesic requirement or opioid requirement in this group of patients. Okay. As I said, just read a little bit about whether regional is better than GA or the pros and cons. So GA is better than regional. Okay. So they have done retrospective studies. There is a lot of controversy, usually a debate topic. Okay. So दोनों के pros and cons है. So you should be able to justify your statement with regards to this. In which patients will you give what? As I told you, emergency, urgent, coagulation factor, delayed versus operating within 48 hours. Okay. And whether they would benefit from reversing the effect of the anticoagulant, or whether that anticoagulant can be reversed if at all. Okay. Okay. What else? Anything correlating pain and mortality or morbidity in hip patients?
Don't know about this one.
The mortality is 1 year mortality is around 30%. Okay, so there's nothing to state that you give good analgesia and the mortality is lower. But as we know, regional anesthesia promotes reduction in the DVT chances. Okay, there is vasodilatation, early ambulation. All these are factors probably which will speak for regional anesthesia. If it is general anesthesia, obviously the patient is put on anticoagulants much earlier, right? Another two important surgical steps which influence the pain in these patients. Can you tell me what? The type of prosthesis? Cemented versus non-cemented, drain versus no drain. Is there any bearing?
For pain.
Oh, on pain. Say cemented is better than uncemented. The pain scores are much lesser. Considering you're giving multimodal in both the groups, there should be no surgical drains. That tags on the tissues and the musculature and contributes to more pain. Less likely about there would be questions on economic impact. Okay, so I'll just should I just share a few slides? I don't know. Amit, they've slept, I think. Nobody has contributed.
One or two questions I would like to ask.
Yes, sir.
Pratiksha, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So we have anterior and posterior division of obturator nerve, also of femoral. So which branch supplies the hip area and which for the knee area? Pratiksha?
Yes, sir. For the obturator, there has been for the hip, either from the anterior division, it is getting the innervation, or the higher up branches, that is before the division has actually taken place, the articular branches for the hip leave from there. So posterior, the branch of the obturator nerve, as we know, that actually goes between the obturator brevis longus, and then it still passes lower down towards the knee. So posterior branch of the obturator should be supplying the knee part.
Yes. Correct, you are. And anything about femoral?
Femoral, again, as we said, that femoral, most of them they found that high branches, they are left before the inguinal ligament. Now, after the division, I'm not sure about the hip, which part, which division. I have to see that, so I'm not sure about it.
Yes, Neeta, you can proceed.
This is what I was talking to you about. Prospect properly. Every major
Neeta, you are not audible.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you can see, when a hip analgesia is asked to you, you should talk about pre-op, intra-op, and post-op. With regards to pre-operative, if, as I told you, the options are limited. What you spoke about, multiple things, are post-operative analgesic techniques, right? So you speak about GA alone, either with peripheral neural block with GA, that you give it pre-operatively. Okay, so the requirement of GA is also less. Talking about spinal with GA or IV sedation, epidural with GA, right? Then pre-operatively, analgesia, actually the prospect group says it's not recommended. There are studies to say that if the patient is in a better sense or presence of mind and comfortable, it has a bearing on the post-op recovery. Okay, so acute pain, usually if you just keep them lying in the bed without much movement, the pain settles. I'm not saying it's severe throughout. If they're immobilized, okay, or splint or traction is given. Considering intraoperatively, if it's GA alone, you have to talk about strong, long-acting opioids, okay, when the patient wakes up. So when it's GA alone, you have to think about immediate post-op, what you're going to give the patient. If it's a block, obviously, it's going to stay in the immediate post-op period, right? So they've spoken about femoral or posterior lumbar plexus block. Talking about single shot LA with morphine. So that obviously is going to give a prolonged post-operative effect as well. But of course, side effects. So I said, anything you speak of, you should speak about at least 5 points in pro. 5 points in PON to justify what you're going to give. Okay, anything you say. With regards to epidural, it's opioid. What they have mentioned is you can add an opioid. Do not use clonidine. It adds to sedation. Okay, and it delays the motor action. It prolongs the motor action. So probably they cannot assess the patient in the immediate post-operative period. And hip surgery is usually, unless it's a revision, don't take more than 1.5 to 2 hours. Okay. Then, as I surgical drains and wound infiltration, prospect group does not recommend. As I said, surgical drains add to the post-operative pain factor. Yeah, so they are not recommended. And there is little to say that LIA actually, there are certain advocates like who's the doctor from Sweden, Amit?
Raval. Professor Narendra Raval.
Narendra Raval. He advocates a lot of LIA. So we spoke about intraoperative. Post-operative, talking about high intensity pain, what options are there? So you talk about paracetamol, COX-2 selective inhibitors, strong opioid by PCA. PCA is another thing you need to mention. Whether it is epidural, whether it is a block femoral PCA. So what is the background infusion? What is the lockout period? Yeah. Or it's an IV PCA. Okay. And this age group, if they're very senile and pre-operative assessment doesn't give a good cognition score, PCA is not for these type of people, probably because they have to be as communicative with regards to pain. Okay. So pre-operative cognitive impairment here to these people in 30-40% of the times, even if it's severe pain, they may not say anything. Okay. Coming to if it's spinal, systemic pain management, again, similar factors are used. Rescue strong opioids. As I said, the lowest dose which is required to bring about pain relief is considered sufficient, right? And that has to be given in a titrated form under supervision. Post-op, there is low and moderate intensity pain. Okay, so there's paracetamol plus COX-2 NSAIDs. As I said, weigh the pros and cons. Okay, so this was a bit with regards to. One more thing is just keep on checking what is the strength of recommendation, class of recommendation, and the quality of evidence. If it's something like class 3, that means benefit and risk is like almost similar. Class 3 may actually say even the risk is more than the benefit. So correlate whatever is suggested with the strength of the recommendation or the level of the recommendation. So this must understand to suggest to anybody. So as I said, this is a summary of the prospect recommendations. It should be initiated in a time to ensure adequate analgesic effect in the immediate post-op period. So anything you give pre-op, which takes care of the immediate post-op, is fine. But again, it is grade D. Okay, so it's not through randomized controlled trials that it is suggested. Talking about intra-op, we have spoken about this. The anesthesia technique selected on the basis of the minimum impact on the comorbid state of the patient. So I don't talk about all high funda blocks. My main thing is minimum impact to take care of the comorbidity of that particular patient. Cardiomyopathy hai, ya very poor cardiopulmonary status, I need to just be done with the surgery first. Okay. And then that can be continued if it's suitable for post-op analgesia. Then talking about analgesia other than that is required for addict, this is okay. The early post-op. Long-term analgesic benefits, cemented prosthesis is recommended. Okay, that's grade B, which is good. No surgical drains associated with increased discomfort is grade A. So in fact, probably we can have a word with the surgeon and tell them, because see, pain scores are more, risk of infection is more, ambulation is poorer because there's something always tagging. People are not, patients are not so forthcoming in moving around. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Post-op analgesia, as I said, COX-2, strong opioids, weak opioids. What options are there? You need to mention. Okay. Then regional anesthesia is the same. We have mentioned single shot is actually advocated. It on short-term pain outcomes after THA, arthroplasty. Okay. It does not consider rehabilitation as there are a lot of variations. Why I'm saying is, in the Western countries, they may rehabilitate in 1 day. In India, they may do it after maybe 12 hours. Okay. So because of variations, there is nothing like you rehabilitate immediately, but you get them on their feet as early is beneficial because the complications are further less. Okay. Now, post-op analgesia, whatever studies are done are mostly done on 36 to 48 hours. So we actually really don't have an idea about what after 48 hours or with regards to chronicity. Now, most patients, more than chronic pain, what I have certain statistics to say that probably only 50% of these people actually get back to their normal activity, which is an alarming number, which we don't have a follow-up of, right? 50% may not come back to their normal functional state at all. 30% may continue to have pain even beyond 48 hours. Unfortunately, we are studying only the first 48 hours, right? Probably the hospital stay. Now, choice of anesthesia is based on disposition of the patient and post-op. Again, prospective again and again the patient's comorbidities and disposition than only considering about post-op pain. Okay. Then some recommend RA over GA alone. Okay. There are the scale is tilting a little bit more in favor of RA, but we have to be prepared for GA. As I said, the various factors. Okay. Step down for high intensity pain, PCM, NSAIDs, COX-2 as appropriate. This was one of the articles I spoke to you about, Anderson and Caleb, which said that LIA may have limited additional analgesic efficacy when combined with a multimodal analgesic regimen, specifically in THA. TKA में फिर भी they have said LIA is contributory to reducing opioid requirement. It may reduce opioid requirement, but the prospect study says no local anesthesia. They do not recommend local anesthesia. Okay, so this was about. I'll just stop.
One or 2 points I would like to add. Yeah, this was when we talk of post-operative pain, TKR, we really have a iatrogenic fracture and patient is asked to move after immediately 3 and 4 hours, and it's quite painful. When it is hip surgery, it is painful, but that sort of pain, when we compare the intensity of pain, they are different usually. So more or less, if we take care of 12 to 18 hours, first 12 to 18 hours for a hip surgery pain, most of them do well. Whereas in TKR, we have to be really up and doing for 48 to 72 hours at times until they are discharged. Now we are in the era of ERAS and very fast tracking type of anesthesia. So we really had nice discussion today. So my question to Pratiksha, which is a $1 million question: if you have a bipolar hip, what is your plan for post-op analgesia? And if you have a total hip replacement, what is your plan for post-op analgesia?
Anesthesia and analgesia, or just post-op analgesia?
Say just post-op analgesia mainly. Today we are discussing. So both surgeries are done under spinal.
Yes.
And what is your plan?
I think in this case, I would like to.
Because as I can understand that you are exposed to varieties of technique, femoral, obturator, lateral femoral cutaneous, subpectineal, PENG. You have done lumbar plexus, continuous catheters. So multimodal analgesia today we have discussed. We have also seen local infiltration analgesia, anesthesia technique and all that. So what is your recipe?
I think I would like to go with suprainguinal fascia iliaca block along with subpectineal obturator nerve block. So for me, that would cover the LFCN, the femoral nerve, as well as obturator nerve. So I think this is the block that I would go for. This would be single shot that I would like to go for without a catheter.
So for most of the hip surgery, this is
Yes.
All for total hip replacement and everything.
Mainly, yes, I want to come up if I replace the suprainguinal fascia iliac with PENG, then again LFCN would be left off. So if I don't want to use more than 2 techniques just for analgesia, a peripheral nerve block. So I think I would like to go with these two, because as such, even accessory obturator nerve, around 54% innervation is seen. More contribution is from the femoral obturator, and of course, with the incision, there is contribution of LFCN as well. So my main uh, focus would be to cover these nerves, femoral obturator and LFCN. So I would want to go with this combination.
Yeah, what you are saying is making sense. Mainly, hip surgery, anesthesia, and analgesia are discussed under two headings. It is said that when patient has pain, intraoperatively the causes may be different because of tearing of ligament, or as they achieve muscle incisions and all. Whereas postoperative pain has more to do with skin incision and suturing of all those wounds.
Hmm.
So overall, you have to look at both aspects and not to forget the skin incision part, so as to cover the postoperative analgesia. So yes, so you have mentioned suprainguinal fascia iliaca plus subpectineal obturate.
Hmm.
So Tika, what is your opinion? What do you think, Nika?
There's nothing which is the best or most ideal, because there are a lot of chances of sparing even with giving. So multimodal should always be mentioned. One thing,
Hmm.
as I said, you don't just rely on a nerve block.
Hmm.
So to complete the answer, I would suggest the factors start, as I told you, preoperatively, intraoperatively, make sure, and postoperatively. The option is good, what she has suggested, considering she's going to give a single shot. Obturator contribution in the postoperative period, I think the incidence of obturator being the cause of pain is quite minimal. So in simple hands with less sophistication of fascia iliaca also proves well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Considering with fascia iliaca, 2 of those 3 nerves which you were targeting are going to be covered, right?
Yes.
And okay, anything else if anybody wishes to add?